In the hushed emerald depths of the sanctuary, where the air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen blossoms, a living ghost paced the shadows. Her name was Alara, a name that meant starlight in a language she would never know, a cruel irony for a creature who had come to fear the light. She was a leopard, a perfect specter of muscle and spotted gold, but her perfection was fractured, broken by a past etched in the language of gunpowder and steel. She was a survivor of the poacher's snare, a relic of a territory now lost to the relentless march of man. Here, in the sprawling enclosure of the Buran Wildlife Conservancy, she was safe. But safety was a concept her traumatized spirit could no longer comprehend. Every rustle of a leaf, every distant call of a bird, every snap of a twig was a premonition of violence. Her world had shrunk to the cold, hard reality of survival, a state of perpetual, high-strung alert. And now, a new and terrifying vulnerability bloomed within her. She was pregnant, her belly swollen with the promise of new life, a promise that felt more like a curse. The life-giving instinct warred with the memory of loss, and the conflict played out in the amber infernos of her eyes. They held no softness, no maternal glow, only a wild, untamable fear. The sanctuary staff watched her on silent monitors, their faces etched with a shared, helpless concern. She had retreated into the deepest recess of the enclosure, a small, dark cave carved into a rocky outcrop, a fortress against a world she had learned to despise. Dr. Lena Petrova, the head veterinarian, represented the voice of pragmatism, of clinical reason. Her concern was for the numbers, the vitals, the tangible risks. A first-time mother, especially one this traumatized, in such a volatile mental state, was a recipe for tragedy. The odds of her rejecting the cubs, or worse, were terrifyingly high. Lena's notes were filled with grim possibilities, her conversations laced with the urgency of potential intervention. She argued for sedation, for a controlled birth in the clinical safety of the veterinary bay. It was the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that mitigated risk. But it was a choice that failed to account for the one thing that cannot be measured by science, the soul. The sanctuary felt the weight of her impending crisis, a silent, collective breath held in anticipation of the moment that would bring either new life or renewed tragedy. For Alara, the world was a cage of memories, and inside that cage, she prepared to face the most primal and perilous journey of all, utterly and terribly alone. Was this sanctuary her final refuge, or just another place to die? Could a spirit so profoundly shattered ever be made whole again? The jungle held its breath, and in the heart of the darkness, a wounded queen awaited her fate, her silent growl a prayer to gods she had long forgotten. She was a masterpiece of evolution, a perfect predator, now reduced to a trembling prisoner of her own past, and the life stirring within her was a ticking clock, counting down to a moment that would either redeem her or break her forever. The air grew heavy, the silence of the jungle deepening, as if the very trees were bending in to witness the unfolding of a story that had begun long before, in the fire and fury of a world that had shown her no mercy. The first pangs of labor would not just be a physical trial. They would be a reckoning with the ghosts that haunted her, a battle for the future of a lineage hanging by the thinnest, most fragile of threads. The crisis was not just coming. It was already here, coiled in the shadows of the cave, waiting to unspool. The sanctuary could only watch and wait and hope for a miracle they had no reason to expect. Her solitude was absolute, a self-imposed exile born of a pain so deep it had become a part of her, inseparable from the very beat of her heart. Every offer of food was met with a guttural snarl, every gentle voice a reason to retreat further into the darkness. She was a fortress of fear, and the walls she had built were impossibly high. The question echoed in the hushed corridors of the sanctuary's main building, a whisper of despair. Who could possibly reach her now? It was a question that seemed to have no answer, a problem with no solution, a knot that could not be untied. The stakes were absolute, a stark portrait of life and death painted against the lush, indifferent green of the jungle. Into this crucible of fear and doubt stepped Dr. Eris Thorne. He was not a new face at the Buran Conservancy, but his presence was often felt more than it was seen. He was a man who moved with the quiet deliberation of the forest itself, a stark contrast to the crisp, clinical energy of Lena Petrova. Where Lena saw a data point, a collection of symptoms and risks to be managed, Eris saw a story. He was a behavioralist, but his methods defied easy categorization. They were a blend of science, intuition, and an almost spiritual patience that bordered on the monastic. He believed that the deepest wounds were not of the flesh, but of the spirit, and that these wounds could not be sutured with steel or healed with chemicals. They required a different kind of medicine: trust, unconditional, unwavering, and freely given. He had watched the monitors, listened to the concerned debates, and a quiet resolve had settled over him. He saw in Alara's magnificent, terrified form not a lost cause, but a profound challenge. He saw the queen beneath the trauma, the mother beneath the fear. Against Lena's well-reasoned arguments for intervention, against the concerned murmurs of the staff, Eris proposed a different path. A path of radical empathy. He would not force her, not sedate her, not cage her in a sterile room. He would go to her, not as a veterinarian, not as a scientist, not even as a caretaker, but as a silent, patient witness. He packed a small kit, a bedroll, a canteen of water, a thermos of tea, and a small library of books he wouldn't read. His intention was not to do, but to be. He set up a small, unobtrusive camp a significant distance from her cave, just at the edge of the enclosure's boundary, a place where she could see him, smell him, study him, but never feel cornered by him. He was making himself a part of her landscape, a fixed, predictable, and utterly non-threatening element. His colleagues watched him with a mixture of respect and deep skepticism. Lena, in particular, found his approach unnerving, almost reckless. Eris, she's a wild animal in extreme distress, she had argued, her voice tight with professional concern. She needs medical supervision, not a vigil. Eris had simply met her gaze, his own eyes calm and clear. She needs to know that not all humans are a threat, Lena. She needs to be given the choice. If we force her now, we prove her right. We prove that we are just another kind of cage. And so his vigil began. From dawn until dusk he would sit, sometimes on a small canvas stool, sometimes on the ground itself, perfectly still for hours on end. He did not stare at her den. He would read or simply look out at the horizon, his posture relaxed, his energy calm and open. He was a silent offering, a constant presence that asked for nothing in return. He was planting a seed of trust in the most barren and hostile soil imaginable, and he was prepared to wait, no matter how long it took, for the first fragile green shoot to appear. He was a savior, not through action or force, but through a profound and radical act of stillness, a testament to his unwavering belief in the power of a quiet, compassionate presence to heal even the most shattered of spirits. The jungle watched this strange tableau, the wounded leopard in her dark cave, and the patient man sitting under the vast, open sky, two solitary beings locked in a silent, unfolding drama that would test the very limits of faith and endurance. His mission was not merely to save the cub she carried, but to save her from the prison of her own past, to give her back the starlight that was her namesake. Days bled into a week, then two. The rhythm of the sanctuary settled into a new pattern, one dictated by the silent dialogue unfolding at the edge of Alara's enclosure. Eris Thorne became a living statue, a fixture of the landscape. The sun beat down on him, the rains drenched him, and the insects of the jungle paid him constant, unwelcome attention, but he remained. He was a monument to patience. Each morning, just as the first rays of light speared through the canopy, he would arrive. He would place a bowl of fresh, raw meat and a pail of clean water at a precise spot, a location far enough from the cave to be unintimidating, yet close enough for her to see the offering. Then he would retreat to his stool, and the slow, meditative process of waiting would begin anew. For the first week, there was no change. Alara remained a ghost, a phantom of movement in the deepest shadows of her den. The food would only be taken long after nightfall, when the world was cloaked in an ink-black secrecy that offered her a semblance of comfort. But Eris, reviewing the night vision camera feeds each morning, saw the small signs of progress that others might miss. He saw the way she approached the food, her initial frantic snatch-and-retreat motion slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving way to a more deliberate, watchful consumption. She was testing the world, testing him. Her reactions to his presence were a study in tension. Her ears, two perfect radar dishes, were constantly swiveled in his direction. The low, guttural growl that vibrated from her chest was a constant refrain, the sound of a tightly wound spring. He could see the muscles in her shoulders bunch and tremble, her body a coiled weapon, ready to strike or flee at the slightest provocation. Extreme close-ups from the hidden cameras revealed the universe of conflict in her eyes. They were a maelstrom of fear, confusion, and a flicker of something else, curiosity. She was watching him, studying his every non-movement. Why did he not approach? Why did he not try to trap her? This human was an anomaly, a puzzle her trauma-addled mind could not solve. Lena Petrova's skepticism remained a palpable force in the daily staff meetings. "This is a beautiful sentiment, Eris, it truly is," she would say, her tone a careful balance of respect and exasperation. "But we are running out of time. Her due date is approaching. We have no idea about the position of the cubs, no idea of her physical state. What if there are complications? Your vigil could turn into a death watch." She was the voice of rational fear, the embodiment of conventional wisdom. Her arguments were sound, her concerns valid. The other staff members were caught in the middle, torn between Eris's soulful conviction and Lena's practical dread. The slow burn of trust was an agonizingly drawn-out process. Eris spoke to her sometimes, not in commanding tones, but in a low, continuous murmur, the verbal equivalent of a gentle stream. He didn't use words of command, but of reassurance. He told her she was safe. He told her she was a good mother. He told her she was magnificent. He was offering not just food, but a sound, a frequency of calm in her chaotic world. There were days of regression, moments when a sudden noise, a backfiring truck on the distant service road, a squabble of monkeys in the canopy, would send her scurrying back into the absolute darkness of her cave, a growl of pure terror echoing from the depths. On these days, the weight of Lena's warnings felt heavier. But Eris never wavered. He simply remained, a steadfast beacon of tranquility. He was teaching her a new language, not of words, but of presence. And slowly, painstakingly, she was beginning to learn. She started to emerge from the cave not just at night, but during the twilight hours, her golden form a breathtaking sight in the fading light. She would not come close, but she would watch him, her head cocked, her breathing still tense, but a new quality of stillness had entered her posture. The frantic pacing had ceased. It was a subtle shift, a barely perceptible change in the emotional atmosphere, but for Eris, it was everything. It was the first sign of a thaw, the first crack in the ice. The trust was not yet won, but the foundation, laid with meticulous, back-breaking patience, was finally beginning to set. The air on the third week grew thick with an electric imminence. The heat was oppressive, the silence of the jungle deeper than ever before. Ilara had not been seen for over 24 hours. Even the night vision cameras showed only the dark, silent mouth of her cave. A tense quiet had fallen over the entire conservancy. In the monitoring room, Lena Petrova's face was a mask of anxiety, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the console. Eris sat in his usual spot, but even his legendary calm seemed stretched thin, his posture rigid with anticipation. Then it began. A low, guttural moan echoed from the cave, a sound of such profound, primal effort that it sent a shiver through everyone who heard it. The labor had started. The cameras inside the den, which Ilara had never discovered, flickered to life on the main screen, showing a grainy black and white image of the leopard, her powerful body contorting with the first waves of contractions. The next few hours were an agony of suspense. The team watched breathless as Ilara, guided by an instinct deeper than any trauma, managed the birth with a raw, savage grace. One by one, the cubs arrived, tiny, squirming, mewling bundles of spotted fur. The first cub, a male strong and loud. The second, a female, slightly smaller, but just as vigorous. The team counted, their voices hushed whispers. 3, 4, 5. Each birth was a small miracle, a victory against the odds. When the sixth cub slid into the world, a collective sigh of relief filled the monitoring room. 6 healthy cubs. It was an astonishingly large litter, a testament to her strength. Lena allowed herself a small, weary smile. She did it, she whispered, a note of pure awe in her voice. The poor girl, she actually did it. But the drama was not over. The team watched as Alara, exhausted but resolute, began to clean her newborns, her rough tongue stimulating their breathing, nudging them towards her belly. But her labor was not finished. Her body tensed again, another powerful contraction racking her frame. Lena frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Another one? 7? That's almost unheard of. A hush fell over the room. On the screen, Alara pushed one last time. But what emerged was not another spotted leopard cub. It was a creature of pure, undiluted night. Small, impossibly black, its fur swallowing the infrared light of the camera. It was a panther cub, a melanistic leopard. For a moment, the room was suspended in utter, absolute silence. The sight was so incongruous, so impossible, it defied all explanation. Where had it come from? It was smaller than the others, clearly a newborn, but it wasn't one of hers. The genetic anomaly for melanism was not present in Alara's known lineage. It simply could not be. Then the realization dawned, a wave of understanding so profound, so shocking, that it broke the silence. Lena Petrova, the scientist, the pragmatist, the woman of logic and reason, let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. It wasn't a scream of terror, but a cry of pure, unadulterated shock, a sound of a worldview being shattered. "My God," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. That's not possible." They rewound the footage from the exterior cameras from the day before. And there it was, a brief, fleeting image of Alara, just before she disappeared into her den. She wasn't just carrying the weight of her own pregnancy. She was carrying something in her mouth. A tiny, black scrap of life. She must have found it orphaned and alone, perhaps the sole survivor of another mother's tragedy. And in an act of breathtaking, incomprehensible empathy, this traumatized, human-hating leopard, on the brink of her own grueling labor, had chosen to rescue it. She had adopted it. She had carried it into the sanctity of her den and was now giving birth alongside it, ready to claim it as one of her own. This was the what came out. Not a monster, not a deformity, but a miracle of compassion that defied every known rule of the wild. Eris, watching from his distant post via tablet, felt tears welling in his eyes. This was the breakthrough. It wasn't about him. It was about her. Her capacity for love was so immense it could cross the boundaries of blood, of species, of her own profound pain. Lena's scream was the sound of logic surrendering to wonder, the sound of science bowing before the mystery of a mother's heart. In the dark of the cave, 7 tiny bodies now huddled against their mother, one of midnight black nestled amongst 6 of spotted gold. The initial wave of awe and wonder quickly gave way to a new, more pragmatic anxiety. The miracle in the cave had created a cascade of new, life-threatening challenges. A litter of 6 was already a monumental task for a leopard in the wild, let alone in captivity. But 7? And one of them not even her own? The biological and logistical hurdles were immense. The tiny black panther cub, whom the staff had begun calling Noctis, Night, was visibly smaller and weaker than his new siblings. He was a fragile shadow amidst a boisterous tumble of golden fur. Lena Petrova's scientific mind, though still reeling from the shock, kicked back into gear. Her initial awe was now tempered with a heavy dose of clinical concern. "This is a beautiful, poetic story, Eris," she stated during a tense emergency meeting, her voice firm. "But biology is not poetry. Alara has a finite amount of milk. The 6 larger cubs will outcompete the smaller one. He'll be pushed away, he'll starve, or worse. Her instinct might eventually lead her to see him as a threat to her biological offspring, and she could reject him, or even kill him. We cannot just stand by and watch that happen." Her logic was impeccable. The rational skeptic had returned, armed with the cold, hard facts of nature. She advocated for immediate intervention. The plan was to sedate Alara just long enough to retrieve Noctis and move him to the nursery for hand-rearing. It was the standard, accepted protocol for such a situation. It was the humane choice, the responsible choice. But Eris Thorn stood in staunch opposition. His voice, though quiet, held a core of unyielding steel. "We can't," he said simply. "Don't you see what happened? This wasn't a random accident. This was a choice. She made a conscious choice to save him. If we go in there now, if we take him from her, we will not only betray her, we will shatter the one thing that has finally started to heal her. We will prove, once and for all, that our help is a violation. We have to trust her." The conflict between them was no longer just about methodology. It was a fundamental clash of philosophies. Lena represented the belief that humanity's role was to correct nature's cruelties. Eris represented the belief that humanity's role was to witness nature's miracles and to trust in its wisdom. The sanctuary was divided. For a few days, it seemed Eris's faith might be rewarded. Alara was a devoted mother to all seven, her large, warm body a haven for the tiny, wriggling lives. She nudged Noctis towards her teats with the same gentle care she showed the others. But then, the setback they all feared occurred. As the cubs grew more active, their competition for milk became more fierce. The 6 stronger cubs, driven by pure instinct, would shove and clamor, pushing the smaller Noctis aside. One afternoon, the monitoring cameras captured a heart-stopping scene. Alara, seemingly irritated by Noctis's weak attempts to feed, nudged him away with her nose, a definitive, dismissive gesture. She then turned her full attention to the others, allowing them to suckle, while the tiny black cub lay, isolated and shivering at the edge of the pile. A wave of dread washed over the monitoring room. Lena looked at Eris, her expression not triumphant, but filled with a deep, sorrowful, "I told you so." The evidence seemed clear. The harsh calculus of survival was taking over. The bond was being tested, and it appeared to be failing. The external threat wasn't a predator. It was the simple, brutal reality of nature itself. The stakes were raised to a new, excruciating level. Was their miracle about to curdle into a tragedy? The open loop of suspense was pulled taut once again. Eris's faith was on the line, and the life of a tiny black panther cub hung precariously in the balance. The sanctuary held its breath, waiting to see if the patient savior's belief was strong enough to overcome the cold, hard truth of the wild. The next 24 hours were the longest of Eris Thorn's life. Noctis grew visibly weaker. His tiny cries became faint, his movements sluggish. He was failing. Every instinct in Lena Petrova screamed for intervention. The incubator was ready, the specialized milk formula prepared. She pleaded with Eris, her voice strained with urgency. "We are watching him die, Eris. We are watching a baby die because of a principle. This isn't faith, it's negligence." The words stung, but Eris held his ground, though his own heart was breaking. He knew she was right in every logical sense. But he also knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that to interfere now would be to lose something far greater. It would be to lose Alara herself, to send her spiraling back into the abyss of trauma from which she had only just begun to emerge. He had to try one more time, his way. It was a gamble of almost impossible proportions. He prepared a small, shallow bowl of the high-calorie milk formula Lena had made ready. But he didn't take a tranquilizer gun or a catch pole. He took only the bowl and his own vulnerability. In the golden light of late afternoon, he did something he had never done before. He walked slowly, deliberately, not just to the edge of the enclosure, but through the gate and towards the cave itself. It was a monumental breach of the boundary he himself had so carefully established. On the monitor, Lena and the team watched in horrified silence. This was madness. Alara's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. A deep, violent growl ripped from her throat, a sound that promised death. She emerged from the cave like a golden demon, her body low to the ground, her lips peeled back from her teeth, her eyes blazing with pure, protective fury. She was a mother defending her young, the most dangerous creature on Earth. She placed herself directly between Eris and her cubs, a living wall of muscle and rage. But Eris did not stop, nor did he flinch. He continued his slow, non-threatening walk until he was a mere 20 feet from the snarling leopard. Then he knelt. He placed the bowl of milk on the dusty ground between them. He did not push it forward. He simply set it down. And then he did the most dangerous and brilliant thing of all. He retreated. Slowly he backed away, never turning his back on her, but keeping his eyes soft, his body language submissive. He returned to the boundary of the enclosure and sat down on the ground, making himself small, showing her that he was not a threat, that he was offering a gift, not a challenge. What happened next would become the central legend of the Buran Wildlife Conservancy, a moment spoken of in hushed, reverent tones for years to come. Ilara stood frozen, her growl subsiding into a low, confused rumble. Her gaze flickered from the strange, vulnerable human to the bowl of white liquid, and then back into the cave where Noctis lay whimpering. The cameras captured the infinitesimal shift in her eyes, a dawning awareness that was profoundly, miraculously intelligent. It was as if she understood everything: the cub's weakness, the man's intention, the offering in the bowl. A silent, nonverbal dialogue was taking place, a communication that transcended the chasm between species. Then she made a choice. It was not instinct. It was a conscious, deliberate decision. She turned her head and looked directly at Eris, a long, steady gaze that held no aggression, only a deep, bottomless knowing. Then, with a grace that was breathtaking to behold, she turned back to the bowl. She did not drink from it herself. Instead, she used her nose to gently, carefully, push the bowl across the ground, inch by inch, until it was at the mouth of the cave, right beside the struggling Noctis. She had accepted his help. She had chosen to trust a human to aid her in saving her adopted child. In the monitoring room, there was a collective, audible gasp. Lena Petrova stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face, her skepticism not just shattered, but completely annihilated. It was a miracle, a true, undeniable miracle. Eris sat on the ground, weeping silently, overwhelmed by the sheer, staggering beauty of the moment. The breakthrough was complete. It was a pact sealed not with words, but with a bowl of milk and an impossible act of faith. The bond was forged, and the life of Noctis, the little panther of the night, was saved. With the barrier of mistrust now irrevocably broken, a new and extraordinary chapter began. The relationship between the patient man and the wounded leopard transformed into something resembling a sacred partnership. The daily offering of milk for Noctis became a ritual, a cornerstone of their shared purpose. Eris was no longer a distant observer. He was an accepted, integral part of Ilara's world. He was, in a sense, a co-parent. Each day he would approach, and each day Ilara would greet him not with a growl, but with a low chuffing sound, a vocalization of recognition and acceptance. She would watch patiently as he placed the bowl down, her presence a calm, majestic supervision. She was allowing him into her sphere of influence, granting him a level of access that the sanctuary staff had never dreamed possible. Lena Petrova's transformation was as profound as Ilara's. The rational skeptic had been converted into an awe-filled believer. She now accompanied Eris on his daily visits, her medical kit no longer a symbol of intervention, but of support. She would observe the cubs from a respectful distance, her clinical eye now guided by Eris's intuitive understanding. Her maternal instincts are flawless, Lena admitted to him one afternoon, her voice soft with wonder as they watched Ilara meticulously groom Noctis. Everything the textbooks say about rejection, about resource competition, she's rewriting the book. Lena's pragmatic skills were now fused with Eris's philosophy. Together, they formulated a plan to provide supplemental food for all 7 cubs as they began to wean, ensuring each one, from the brawniest male to the delicate Noctis, received enough nutrition. The process was always the same. Eris would approach with the offering, and only with Ilara's silent, permissive nod would Lena follow. The rest of the sanctuary staff, once divided, were now united in their reverence for what was unfolding. The story of Alara and Eris became an internal legend, a source of inspiration that lifted the morale of the entire conservancy. The deepening bond was visible in 100 small interactions. Alara began to bring the cubs out of the cave during the day, allowing them to bask in the sun, a sign of her complete sense of security. The 7 young ones, a tumbling, playful mass of gold and black, would frolic and pounce, their mother's watchful eye never far away. Sometimes she would lie with her head on her paws, watching Eris as he sat in his usual spot, and a look of deep, peaceful understanding would pass between them. The skeptical secondary characters, Lena, the other keepers, were not just won over. They became disciples of this new, compassionate approach. They saw that Eris hadn't just saved a family of leopards. He had demonstrated a profound truth about the nature of healing. He had proven that trust is a more powerful tool than force, that patience can rebuild a world shattered by trauma. As the cubs grew stronger and more independent, the bond between Alara and Eris only solidified. It was no longer based on the necessity of saving Noctis, but on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared history of overcoming crisis. He had been her anchor in the storm, and she, in turn, had become his testament to the limitless power of the animal spirit. The family unit was a breathtaking spectacle. The magnificent Golden Queen, her 6 golden princes and princesses, and her 1 dark, mysterious son, all thriving under the gentle guardianship of the man who had refused to give up on them. The recovery was no longer in question. It was a living, breathing reality, a vibrant tapestry of interspecies collaboration and love. The seasons turned at the Baran Conservancy, painting the jungle in new shades of green and gold. The cubs were no longer tiny, helpless creatures. They were now boisterous, half-grown adolescents, sleek and powerful, their youthful energy a constant, vibrant presence in the enclosure. Alara had fully transitioned from a haunted survivor into the serene and confident matriarch she was always meant to be. Her physical recovery was complete, her coat glossy, her eyes clear and bright, but it was her emotional and spiritual healing that was the true marvel. The ghost of her past had been exorcised not by forgetting, but by the overwhelming, present-tense reality of her new life, her new family. The resolution of her story was not just about survival. It was about transcendence. She was thriving. The sight of her unique family became the centerpiece of the Conservancy's private tours for major donors and visiting conservationists. A magnificent leopard mother, surrounded by 6 leopard cubs and 1 jet black panther, living in perfect harmony. It was a living, breathing symbol of hope, a powerful testament to the Conservancy's mission. The narrator's voice, once filled with the tension of crisis, now took on a tone of reverent reflection. This was more than just a story about an animal rescue. It was a profound, universal parable. It was about the power of a mother's love, a love so vast it could bridge the gap between bloodlines, a love that saw no color or creed, only a life in need of saving. It was a story about the extraordinary power of patience, about the quiet, unyielding force of a single individual's belief to change the world, even if that world is just one small enclosure in the heart of Africa. It was a story about the deep mystical connection that is possible between species, a silent understanding that speaks a language older and more profound than words. How is it possible that a creature so brutalized by humans could learn to trust one so completely? Could it be that the capacity for forgiveness, for love, for grace is not a uniquely human trait, but a universal force woven into the very fabric of life itself? The final scenes are a montage of pure, uplifting beauty. Slow-motion shots of the cubs at play, their movements a dance of youthful joy. An extreme close-up on Noctis, now nearly as large as his siblings, his black fur gleaming like polished obsidian, nuzzling affectionately against his golden mother. A wide cinematic shot of Alara perched atop the highest rock in her enclosure, surveying her domain not with fear, but with a calm, regal authority. Her new reality was safe, it was peaceful, it was whole. The trauma was a scar, but no longer an open wound. The story concludes not with an ending, but with a new beginning. Ilara had not just been rescued, she had been redeemed. She had found her starlight again, and in doing so, had become a beacon for all who witnessed her journey, a timeless reminder that even in the deepest darkness, love has the power to heal, to unite, and to create miracles. As the cubs matured into formidable young hunters, a new kind of dynamic emerged, one that would test the established bond in an entirely different way. The adolescent leopards, full of rambunctious energy and burgeoning predatory instincts, began to see Eris not just as a provider, but as a curiosity, a potential plaything. Their mock stalking became more intense, their playful swats more powerful. This was not a setback born of fear, but a new chapter defined by confidence. One evening, a powerful thunderstorm, a true tropical deluge, rolled across the sanctuary. The sky turned a bruised purple, and lightning tore jagged scars across the horizon. The ensuing thunderclaps were deafening, shaking the very ground. In years past, such an event would have sent Ilara into a state of sheer panic terror, driving her deep into her cave, a prisoner of reactivated trauma. The staff watched the monitors, a flicker of old anxieties returning. But Ilara did not panic. She gathered her 7 large cubs, herding them with calm, authoritative nudges towards the shelter of the rock overhang. She was unsettled, yes, but not terrified. Her first instinct was not to hide, but to protect. And then she did something remarkable. She looked out from her shelter through the sheeting rain, her gaze searching the landscape until she found him. Eris was there, standing under a small canvas awning at his usual post, a steadfast presence even in the maelstrom. Their eyes met across the rain-swept distance. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of reassurance. In that moment, her entire posture softened. She saw her anchor, her constant, and the tension visibly drained from her body. She turned, licked the head of a nervous cub, and settled down to wait out the storm. She had not reverted to fear. She had turned to her trusted friend for reassurance. Her healing was profound and permanent. The culmination of their journey, however, came on a quiet, sun-drenched afternoon a few weeks later. The storm was a distant memory, and a peaceful lethargy had settled over the enclosure. Eris was sitting on the ground, leaning against the strong wire mesh of the fence, reading a book. He was aware of a presence, and looked up to see Ilara approaching. She moved with a liquid grace, her paws making no sound on the soft earth. Her cubs were napping in a pile nearby. She was alone. She did not stop a few feet away, as she usually did. She walked directly to the fence, until only the thin barrier of woven steel separated them. Eris remained perfectly still, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. She was so close he could see the individual whiskers on her muzzle, the intricate patterns of gold and black in her irises. She sat down, mirroring his posture. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two beings from different worlds, united by an extraordinary history. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her right paw. It was a massive paw, tipped with claws that could tear a man to shreds, but the gesture was infinitely gentle. She pressed it against the wire mesh. A silent offering, a gesture of profound, unimaginable significance. Eris, his breath caught in his throat, slowly raised his own hand. He mirrored her action, placing his palm flat against the mesh, his fingers just inches from her own. It was not a touch of flesh to flesh, but it was a touch of souls, a connection across the final barrier. In that moment, every second of his patient vigil, every doubt he had overcome, every risk he had taken, culminated in this single, sacred act. It was her thank you. It was her acknowledgement of their bond. It was a symbol of a trust so complete, so absolute, it defied words. It was a silent promise, a paw against a hand, a bridge between the wild and the human heart, a moment of pure, reverent, and transcendent grace. The story of Ilara Noctis and Eris was no longer just a local legend within the Conservancy. It became a beacon of hope for the global conservation community. Photographs and videos of the unique family, the Golden Mother, her 6 golden cubs, and her 1 Black Panther son, went viral, capturing the hearts of millions. The image of Ilara's paw on the fence, opposite Eris's hand, became an iconic symbol of interspecies connection, a visual shorthand for the very soul of the sanctuary's mission. Dr. Lena Petrova, once the voice of skepticism, became the story's most passionate advocate. She co-authored a paper with Eris, not for a dry scientific journal, but for a mainstream wildlife publication, detailing their journey. She no longer spoke only of biology and survival rates. She spoke of empathy, of trust, and of the unquantifiable emotional intelligence of non-human animals. The Eris method, as it became informally known, began to be incorporated into the official training protocols at Buran and other affiliated sanctuaries. It was a paradigm shift, moving away from a model of pure clinical management towards a more holistic approach that honored the emotional and psychological well-being of the animals. The final, overarching message of the narrative was one of profound and universal hope. The narrator's voice swells with an inspirational, awe-filled tone. This was a story that reminded a weary world of what is possible. It taught us that the deepest wounds can be healed, not by force, but by a quiet and relentless patience. It showed us that the definition of family is written not in blood, but in love, a love powerful enough to adopt the orphan and nurture the different. It posed a final, powerful rhetorical question to the audience. What else are we capable of if we choose to lead with compassion instead of fear? If we have the courage to sit in quiet witness, to offer help without demanding submission, to believe in the possibility of a miracle? The final visual sequence is a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. Epic, cinematic shots of the now-grown cubs, powerful and majestic. Noctis, a sleek, muscular phantom, moves through the trees, indistinguishable in his grace and power from his siblings. We see Lena and Eris standing side by side, watching the family, their faces filled with a shared sense of accomplishment and wonder. The camera focuses one last time on Alara. She is resting on her favorite rock, the setting sun casting a halo of golden light around her. She is no longer a victim, a survivor, or a patient. She is a queen, a mother, a legend. She turns her head and looks directly into the camera, her eyes holding a deep, calm wisdom. It is a look of peace, of fulfillment, of a soul restored. The shot holds on her magnificent face, then slowly dissolves into a breathtaking, panoramic view of the African savanna at sunset, the sky painted in hues of fire and gold. The story of Alara is a testament to the enduring power of hope, a reminder that the most extraordinary connections are often found in the most unexpected places, and that the language of love is a tongue understood by all living things. It is a promise that even after the deepest trauma, the starlight can and will return.